Final hour OverDrive continues, brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Leafs Oilers tonight. James Duthie will join us later in the hour in studio. That game on TSN 4 and right here on TSN Radio. So we look forward to that tonight. McDavid versus Matthews. Tons of Leaf fans in the building. Big trip. Jonas Siegel in here of The Athletic. This is a big one, Jonas.
Good teams. They're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a little like a dip. I don't think they've played terribly during this recent stretch. Leads in each of those games against the Islanders, Avs, Red Wings.
It's not sky is falling for the Leafs, but I think even you go back to before the break where, they lose to Buffalo, they lose to Ottawa.
Yeah, and then they righted that. They beat the teams they're supposed to beat.
Yep.
But, I don't know. It's just been you talk to the players, talk to the coaches. Just up and down the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
And, I bet you go to every team and they're like, we'd love to be more consistent.
Of course.
But they just haven't reached the level I think you'd want them to reach for a team that's trying to win the Stanley Cup. But, we've talked about, the roster isn't there yet. Yeah,
it doesn't scream juggernaut at this point, and I don't think it will between now and the end of the year, but there still are 41 games left. That's another part of it. The analysis, you have a lot of sample size. 41 games is a lot. We've seen it. It's been very inconsistent. We know about the wins in regulation. We know about their special teams. We know about their goaltending, their defense, etc. But they're in the middle of the dog days of the season. I actually think this trip has come at a perfect time because they've lost the games they've lost, because
get your attention kind of.
Yeah, it's it's dark, it's cold, it's January. You're like, man, we're still 41 games away from the spring and from the playoffs, where you're going to come to the table tonight if you're the Maple Leafs and understand the other guys have won 10 in a row. Connor McDavid's ready to rock. There's going to be 15,000, well, not that many, but there'll be 7,000 or 8,000 Leaf fans in the building. I think this is a good trip. I think it's actually at a perfect time. And they better be ready to play, because if they play like they did over the weekend, especially against Detroit, they'll get spanked tonight. And they'll probably lose to Calgary if they play like that. They'll lose to Vancouver if they play like that. It's 2 weeks, man. This is a big, big opportunity for them to just cool everyone off and make people feel good about them again, or really hammer home that they have issues. And it's time to buckle up, because it's not a guarantee they're going to make the playoffs.
Well, what do you think, if you're looking ahead to the second half, is something you think can be a lot better? Because, if I'm looking at things, I'm looking at their roster, I'm thinking, what's going to be better? The one thing I can kind of point to, or person, is Marner. If Marner is Marner like he was the other night, they take a step in the second half. Other than that, their power play can probably be a bit better than it's been. Their penalty kill,
I think that's the one.
It's just I don't know who they just don't have penalty killers.
Well,
I don't.
But Brody's been killing penalties for 5 years.
Yeah, but he's also he's at a different stage in his career now.
Yeah, that's clear.
There's just but he's the one guy I look at. I mean, Tavares can be better, but I'm not counting on that, age and all that stuff. Marner's the guy I can look at and say, that guy has it in him. When he goes up a level last year, remember the second half 2 years ago, he took off. He does that.
They need it.
They kind of need it.
Yeah, it's mandatory. That's how they're built. They're a top-heavy team. They need their big – when they're rocking, that's what it is. It's those guys. Matthews is on pace for 65. Mitch is going to hit 100 points. Willie's dancing. And then everything else filters in properly.
You're right. And the way it is built is an important part of this, because, you've got the 4 players making 40. If 2 of them are just,
playing like they should be making 7, that's
a big problem.
Big discrepancy. Yeah, it is. So JD on that and more still to come later in the hour. The Raptors end up losing last night. It was a tight game, and then in the fourth, Boston just said, we're going to separate. We're separating. And
we can shoot and you can't?
Basically, we can shoot and you can't. And the Raptors, this Pascal Siakam story, at some point it's going to come to a head. I can't picture them signing him to an extension, so I think they just have to accept the market for what it is. Yet, I will give credit where it's due. Masai has held out and held out and held out and got the deal he was looking for. By all accounts, the Anunoby deal, that's what he wanted. He was looking for guys that can come in and play, younger guys like Quickly, younger guys like RJ Barrett. And I would assume he's having a similar approach to Siakam. Got to a point where the Knicks said, fine, we'll pay that price. We'll see if other teams pay the price for Pascal.
You sure they won't just extend him if they can't get what they want?
Why would Siakam do that at this point?
Money.
No, I know, but I guess you're right. If they put a deal in front of him that's going to pay him $50 million a year or something, he probably would. But then you're paying him that's Giannis money and Embiid money and Kawhi money.
You can trade him down the road, in theory.
Yeah, I guess you're kicking it down the road because even with Siakam, they're not a championship team.
Not even close.
They're a bottom 10 team in the league right now. All right, here's Brian Windhorst of ESPN. Brian, can you picture a scenario where Pascal Siakam and the Raptors agreed to an extension before the deadline?
Before the trade deadline?
Trade deadline, yep.
I'd find it hard to believe, but I wouldn't rule anything out. I don't think, though, that he would take anything other than a full max extension.
Right.
Which is, with where the league is right now, you got to be very careful about paying players max salaries who may not be, max performers. And he's a very, very good player. He's been a multi-time All-NBA player. And, if the 65-game rule was in effect last year for All-NBA, he might have squeezed on the All-NBA team last year, and he might have been in position to get the Supermax because he's been a very steady, high-level player. But with where the league is now, you got to be very, very careful with guys making that 30% max. So when I say 30%, the first max when you're first eligible, the one that Pascal is on now, is 25% of the cap. Then you go through that one, then you're eligible for 30%. Then the next one after that, you're eligible for 35%. I dubbed the first one the fun max because it's usually a lot of excitement about the player signing it. The player is usually younger, healthier, has big excitement. The second max, which is where Pascal is now, I call the stress max. Mm-hmm. Because you're worried about the player not signing it. You're worried about the player not necessarily being that valuable. Maybe he's had some injuries. Maybe he wants to leave, which we see a lot of guys on the second max. And so it's a classic stress max situation. And it's one of the reasons why he's been involved in trade talks for a while.
Yeah, and we were discussing it just prior to having you on, Brian, about where Masai and Bobby Webster come into play on this, who have been stubborn, in the past in terms of placing a value on their guys and not stepping off it. We saw it with Lowry a couple of years ago. I guess we saw it with Van Vliet. And yet the Anunoby deal, I think they feel like they got what they were looking for in the end. In terms of where Siakam comes into play in that, do you believe Masai Ujiri has a price that he's looking for in order to trade him and he won't budge? Or do you think the market has effectively been set by teams that are kicking tires and he's just going to have to take what's out there at this point?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the Raptors front office, it's a classic case of actions over words. Their actions, forget about what is said, their actions dictate that they have a price and they are not afraid to have egg on their face and have a guy walk on them for nothing if it means not doing a deal that they want. Mm-hmm. And, there's some value to that. And, who's to say how much of that played into the fact what they were able to get back from the Knicks? The Knicks knowing that they weren't going to be able to get a trade done unless they met a certain price. I mean, yeah, it's hard to see Van Vliet leave for nothing, but maybe in the long run there's a value to that. And maybe that plays into the way negotiations for Pascal will go. But when it comes to where Siakam is, it's almost like a European soccer player. When a European soccer player of a high level wants to switch teams, there's a double negotiation. The first negotiation is with the team he's going to go to about what his salary is going to be. And then, and usually only then, is there a negotiation between the teams. Usually it's about just straight money. They just have this transfer fee. They don't trade players. But it's like a bilateral negotiation. That's the way it is for Pascal. You're not going to pay premium price for him unless you feel like he's going to be able to stay with your team or interested in staying. And so that's a double negotiation. If I was Pascal at this point in the proceedings, if a team wanted me bad enough, my vibe would be like, I want the max. And if you're not willing to pay me the max, be prepared to leave me for nothing. So before you get into the trade machine and work out your best Siakam trade of all time, you better know that the team that would potentially trade for him, A, he'd be willing to sign there, and B, that team's willing to at least at this point indicate they're willing to give him the max. And that's why you have a hard time making connections on this.
Well, and there's been ample reporting on that indicating that Siakam and his camp have told prospective teams, like, I'm not signing with, like, I'm not committing to you. I want to get to free agency or I want to stay in Toronto. I don't know if
there's another layer to that.
Okay, go ahead.
Layer to that.
What is that?
Well, if he's traded during this contract, he can't get the Supermax. It doesn't matter if he goes somewhere and averages 75 points a game and shoots 100% and they win the title.
Mm-hmm.
Once you are traded away from the team that you have been with for your career, there's more details than that, but I'll just leave it at that. You lose the ability to get the Supermax. So one of the reasons why he was fending off any interest over the summer is that he wanted to stay in Toronto and get all NBA so that he could have a chance to get the Supermax, which would have been, I don't know what the most recent figures are, like $70-80 million more. That's not to say the Raptors would have given it to him. But if he's traded, he loses that ability. So, that was part of the motivation as to why he was saying that and has said that in the past, just so you know.
Okay.
Well, that changes, obviously, the conversation for lots of these teams. Is there one out there, Brian, though, like pure basketball fit, forget about what they have to give out, that you look at and say, that's the team that needs Pascal Siakam the most?
Yeah, I think 76ers are interesting, but I think the team that has real interest in him and there's a possible connection there would be the Pacers. And I'm sure you guys have talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing I can tell you that you probably don't already know. But, obviously there would have to be, like, when the Knicks traded for OG Anunoby, I think they got it, without making any accusation here, I think they got a pretty good feel that he's going to be there, right?
Yeah, there's some connections there, right?
Right. The Pacers would have to get to a point where they felt doing a deal like that they'd be acquiring a player who wants to stay there. So again, that's a hurdle one. But if you look at what they have on their roster and you look at what they have in terms of what they can trade, there's a deal to be made there. Mm-hmm. Whether or not a deal can be made is a different negotiation.
With Brian Windhorst of ESPN, the Jakob Poeltl trade still looms over this team and the fan base, and I'm sure you're aware of why that would be the case. Obviously, the first-round pick they gave to San Antonio was top 6 protected. Let's assume Siakam gets dealt. Even with Siakam, they're a bottom 7 or 8 team in the league right now.
Yeah.
How do you think that possibly hangs over the team and the decisions in terms of Darko, in terms of Masai, Bobby Webster, the rotation, how they approach the rest of the season, knowing that is top 6 protected this year?
Yeah, I think the Spurs are probably one of the most interested parties in listening to Pascal Siakam trade rumors.
Right.
I'm sure they have some trades that they could suggest. So again, let's go to actions over words. The trade that the Raptors made with the Knicks was not a trade that weakened the team. It strengthened the team. So again, I would focus on those actions and assume that if they're looking to make a trade, that it would be a trade that keeps the team strong in the short and intermediate term, and potentially even it helps them do both have a better growth potential and remain strong for now. So I think you don't even have to speculate. You can just look at what they actually have done. And, that trade, I think, made, finishing with the 7th pick, which is the worst case scenario, less likely. I don't know about how much percent less likely, but I think they're a more formidable team now than they were a couple of weeks ago.
With Brian Windhorst of ESPN, Golden State, like, everyone's trying to figure out what happens there, what's available, how they turn this over. Obviously, we've seen them play. We saw what happened last year. Assuming Steph is safe and Steph is going to be the man there, for the foreseeable future. Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Steve Kerr, I guess. Like, how much change could we possibly see in the next 2 or 3 years?
I've been talking about this for hours with folks in the league over the last 6 to 10 days or whatever. It's a very difficult position because if you say that they're done, it's over, shovel the dirt on them, you may be right. It may be done. It may be a situation that is unrecoverable. But I'm not sure that there is something they can do mid-season that's going to be more likely to result in a better outcome than sticking with this group and hoping they rediscover it. Now, you can give me 50 reasons why that won't happen, and my response will be, I think it's the best of the available options, and I've just been around long enough. I've covered the NBA for over 20 years. The restorative value of the length of the season is unparalleled. The season is extremely long. There is time to correct things. Now, what I think the best thing to do would be to go to Steph and saying, Steph, what do you want us to do? But knowing Steph like I do, and just this is not super inside information, Steph's going to say, what I want to do is make 10 threes tonight and win tonight's game. Steph is not a guy who looks for three-dimensional chess. That's not... Also, Steph doesn't want it on his head where they're going to break up the team or keep the team together. That's not his job, and I don't think he wants that job. But, we just saw this terrible moment happen in Chicago over the weekend where Jerry Krause, who's been passed away for several years now, got booed. And he got booed largely because of the way he was portrayed in The Last Dance. I highly doubt that many people in the crowd actually booed him because they have a visceral feeling about him. Mm-hmm. But the reason that there's hard feelings there is because he broke up this championship team. Jerry Krause might have had 50 different reasons why it made sense. And they all may have been smart. But when you break something up, there's a cost there. It's not on the whiteboard in the boardroom, I can explain to you why it makes sense to do it. But out there in real life with the real people, with the guys who've been in there and won those titles together, it's a lot harder. And so that's why it may not be right, but I think the best move for them, and I think they're conflicted on it, just to be clear. I don't think it's a decision's been made. But I think it's real. It makes more sense to just hold them together and drive until the wheels fall off.
Well, Brian, I think you're alluding to this, but is there a trade that they can even make that puts them back into that conversation? And can they do it without including Kuminga? Is there something you think they can do to get back?
I don't see it. If you're asking, do I think if they traded for Siakam,
right,
and they traded Kuminga and Wiggins for Siakam, that all of a sudden that would cure all their ills? Maybe it would, but I can't demonstrate for sure that it would. And it's just as more reasonable that Klay Thompson could be awesome for the last 3 months of the season, like he was last season, not 4 years ago, last season. Draymond Green, his game isn't predicated on his athleticism or his ability to hit a shot. I can see why they would have that discussion, but the idea that would be a solution, there's a lot of skin in the game to be betting on that solution.
Well, and then you go, 4 or 5 hours south in the car and you get to the Lakers, Brian, and how different is the tone there? They haven't had the same dynasty. They did win in the bubble a few years ago. You've got LeBron, you've paid AD, yet, they're a game under 500. I would assume the same thing you just said about you have time to figure this out. There's a lot of games left. But how comfortable are the Lakers in maybe believing that they actually have the makings of a championship team there?
Well, they're confused because they really thought that the team that they had last year was reasonably close. I think it's pretty clear that the Nuggets were a cut above them, but they had the choice to clear out their team and open up a bunch of cap space and chase somebody like Kyrie Irving. And they basically elected to bring their team back with a couple of minor tweaks, and it hasn't worked. By the way, they really do miss Schroeder.
He misses that payday too, man. He misses that contract they offered him.
Well, that's a long story, but that is that's not for nothing. What he did for them, they missed. Now they signed a replacement, and that replacement hasn't played, so it's not as clean as saying that. But I was over in Manila watching Schroeder win the MVP, and for Germany in the World Cup. It was a pretty impressive display. It wouldn't now that the Raptors have sort of traded for a future starting point guard, if I was the Lakers, I might call to see what the price was.
No kidding.
For Schroeder. Just to be clear, not that I've heard that. Next thing I know, I'll be getting calls. Not that I've heard that. Okay, are we clear?
Okay,
but
we got you.
But anyway, I think their situation is, they got LeBron 39 years old, and he's still playing at a high level. And I honestly don't think there's a move that they can make where they can win the championship this year. I don't think they're one of the teams. But there are, they have two things of value, quote unquote. One is Auston Reeves, and one is the future draft pick they have. Which the reason it has value is because there's an assumption that the Lakers will collapse after LeBron retires. It's not an unreasonable assumption because they didn't make the playoffs for 6 years before he got there. So that pick has value. And if they can make a trade where they can hold on to one of those two things and improve their team and take their team from a team that's in the play-in to take to a team that's in the top 6, and you give yourself a fighting chance or somebody else's unlucky sprained ankle away, that's what you do. And that's what I think they will do. I don't think they're going to make a trade that's going to change the balance of power in the league, but they could make a trade that could make them better, that could make them more dangerous.
Well, if you were in Manila watching Dennis do what he was doing, that means you saw Shai Gilgeous-Alexander put on a clinic.
I sure as hell did.
Yeah, and drag Canada back to the Olympics for the first time in 24 years, and he was just announced as the Canadian Athlete of the Year, and rightfully so, and goes without saying we're excited up here.
When was the last time a hockey player didn't win that award?
It doesn't happen as much as you think, Brian. Because I think we vote against that because we're looking for guys like Shai and Olympic years. We had we've got Davies that's playing over in the German league. We've got soccer players. So it actually doesn't happen as much as you'd think. And quite frankly, Connor McDavid, the season he had last year, was out of this world, and they still gave it to Shai, justifiably because of what I think he did at the World Cup and getting them to Paris. But obviously he's carried it over. I don't know if you have a vote for MVP, but if you do or if you don't, I mean, it seems like he's on pace to do that. Like how good is this guy in your eyes, and how much more ceiling is there for him to continue to grow in Oklahoma City?
I couldn't be a bigger believer in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander than I already am. I voted for him for first-team All-NBA last year. He was on my MVP ballot. He wasn't obviously first, but he was on my ballot. I'm a huge believer in him. I think he can take the Canadians to the gold medal. There are a lot of things have to happen, but I think it absolutely can happen. He was the best player in the World Cup. Doncic put up some big numbers. He was the best player. Mm-hmm. And, they played that bronze medal game. I know that it was like 4 a.m. Eastern on the East Coast. I'm not so sure how many people actually saw it. In the U.S., it wasn't, ESPN didn't even put it on broadcast television. You had to get it on the package. In that game was one of the best games I've seen in the last few years. Mikal Bridges executes an absolutely jaw-dropping 4-point play in the last 3 seconds to force overtime. It's a legendary play. It'll never be remembered.
Yeah.
I'll bet if you even went and asked like Mikal Bridges fans, they wouldn't have even seen this play. But he executed a 4-point play that I would encourage you to look up just so that you're a more educated basketball fan. And then they went to overtime, and Shai wrapped his hands around the U.S.'s throat and put them down to the ground mercilessly. Mm-hmm. And I would argue he's never been in a bigger moment. Now, people who don't understand basketball and don't understand what it means to Canada to have won that medal, I mean, being there with those guys, I mean, that was a huge accomplishment.
It was.
And that was the biggest game she had ever played in. He never played in a playoff game of that level. I mean, he will play in bigger games, I believe. And he just took it by the throat and put them down. 3 straight possessions, said, "You're not going to stop me," and took them down. I mean, Dylan Brooks, Dylan would be upset if I didn't mention that he had like one of the greatest games of his life.
He was great.
And he did. And it was the summer of Dylan, and I interviewed him after the game, and I thought he would have gloated a little bit more. He was actually admirably restrained when he actually had the right to say anything. So I don't want to take anything away from Dylan, but it was Shai who was so amazing. And so, I think the sky is the limit for him in all of his endeavors, whether it's with the Thunder or with Team Canada.
We love hearing that, Brian, and we love catching up with you, man. Thank you for doing this.
Enjoy your week. Take care.
You got it. Brian Windhorst of ESPN. That's a statement. He thinks he can drag them to the gold medal. I mean, that obviously he's going to need help. He's going to need the rest of certainly the NBA talent to be available to him. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I looked this up on FanDuel, Doogie. I'm pretty sure he's got the best odds to win the MVP.
Really?
He's in the top 5 for sure.
Ahead of Jokic, ahead of Embiid, ahead of Giannis, ahead of Luka.
Look, they're second
if you're
in the
right,
West, man.
That's
like, look at it's Oklahoma City. They're second in the West. Like, I'm guessing Anthony Edwards will be up there. Like, my guess would, I haven't looked in a while, but it would be Shai. Should be Embiid. Should be Doncic, I think.
Tatum will be in there.
All right, guys, I
Probably
got the
Tatum.
odds here for you.
Okay, go ahead, Doogie.
Nikola Jokic leads with a plus 170 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Canadian Shai Gilgeous-Alexander plus 280, second on the list.
Wow.
Okay.
Above Luka Doncic and Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Okay, so that's your top 4. Where's Embiid? Does it go further down on FanDuel or?
He's fifth with plus 800.
Okay. So yeah, I guess Giannis, Luka, Embiid, Jason Shea, and
That's incredible.
Jokic. That's how good he's been. Like his numbers are off the charts, and they're 27-12. Oklahoma City. Yeah, he's been that good.
He might not be wrong. Like if they get everyone playing, like you would have Shea, Jamal Murray, Wiggins. I guess in theory you'd have Dylan Brooks. Who knows which version of Wiggins? But like,
yeah,
you got something interesting.
Yeah, you do. Like you've got
Mathurin in Indiana.
That's right.
Yeah, you got some big men.
You got like Lou Dort. You've got
our guy in Dallas. Yeah, RJ Barrett's a good one.
Yeah, RJ's probably coming off the bench.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing about Dylan Brooks. Like, Brooks played such a prominent role.
He's probably your power forward, I would think, your small forward.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going with Shea and Murray in the backcourt. Like, that's your starting backcourt.
That's as good as there is.
I don't think there's another country, the states included, that are matching that.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, if Steph plays, but Steph's great. Like, I don't know. There's a number of guys clearly in the States that you can point to. Joel Embiid's an American now. Embiid's playing for the States, which is crazy. And obviously he's not a guard, but still, if he plays for the Americans, that is going to be a big boost. It's an uphill battle. It'll be tough at the Olympics to beat the Americans, to beat, like
Spain.
You always see Spain there. You see Brazil, Argentina. Yeah. But still, they're going. That's all that matters. All right, James Duthie, we hope, is going to join us in studio. We'll see. We'll get to our best bets brought to you by FanDuel later in the afternoon as well. OverDrive continues, TSN 1050 and on TSN 2. All right, we'll get to our best bets brought to you by FanDuel later in the hour. Leafs Oilers tonight on TSN 1050. Jonas Siegel of The Athletic in here. Seeing Sheldon Keefe talking about Tyler Bertuzzi in particular and how inconsistent he's been of late. But also saying that it seems the harder and the more competitive the team is we're playing against, the better we get from him. So they need something. You mentioned he hasn't scored a lot. He hasn't put up points. They're paying him money. He's playing in the top 6. Although tonight I think he's going to play with Domi on the third line.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting line. Like, you got 3 veterans, Bertuzzi, Domi, Yarncroke, both got, like, all 3 have been around. All 3 are, capable of supplying more than they probably have at different points in the season. And he's trying to find a line. He's trying to find another line deeper down the roster that you can get something out of. And I think Matthews looks like he's going to play with Marner again tonight.
Well, what's interesting is he mentioned the other day that he wants to get another look of Bertuzzi with Matthews, which I think is worth seeing in the second half. But I think he's right. Like, there have been some nights where you just don't notice him that much. He's just not, when he's in it, like, you can really feel it. Like, he's just like, I think of him like a bowling ball. He's just like crashing into everybody. He's around the net. He's like annoying people. He's really competitive. And then there's just like a lot of nights like the weekend where you just don't notice him a ton. And like you pointed out, like, he's the 6th highest paid player on the team. He's on pace for, I think, 12 goals, 30-ish points. Like, it's just like,
gotta have more than that.
You think of like the player he's replacing, and granted, like, Michael Bunting the previous 2 years wasn't making anything. But Bunting was good for 22, 23 goals. I think he actually had 23 both years, 60-odd points. Like, he was giving you, and granted, there was a lot of other stuff. He drew a lot of penalties. He took a lot of penalties. But you were kind of hoping Bertuzzi could give you all the good that Bunting did without a lot of the noise. And it just hasn't happened. Like, I still think it might happen in the playoffs just because of the type of player he is. But to this point, like, it's just been a bit disappointing, I think.
Yeah, and I think Matthew Nyes has hit a rookie wall.
100%.
That's happened too.
He's already almost, like, he's played 39 games. He played 40 last year, the whole year.
Right.
Like, it was asking so much to play him on the top line.
Exactly. And that was always going to happen. And that's, when you have that and it's compounded by Tavares having his worst stretch.
Yeah.
Marner just, playing okay, but not playing as dominant as he's capable of playing. Then, again, this is what you get. You get a team that looks like they're just middle of the pack and they've got issues and they got fires they got to put out. And it's easier said than done over the course of an 82-game grind, and that's what it is. You have ups and downs. Every team has weaknesses. Every team has slumps. It's going to happen. But when you have your big boys playing at the pace they're supposed to be, you don't have to focus as much on what Bertuzzi's going to do or Nyes is going to do. But what they can bring is if they play their best when the other guys are playing their best, then all of a sudden you're talking serious business, right? Then you're really, I think, talking about a team that can at least include themselves in a conversation with the best teams in the league.
The only thing I would argue with is usually you have to be really good defensively to win a cup. They're not really good.
No, they're not.
They're like average-ish, maybe a little bit worse, and the personnel dictates that that's probably what they should be. And I just don't know if that's going to change in the second half without major upheaval, of which I don't know what you can do. Like, if you added, let me ask you this. I wanted to ask you this. You add Chris Tanev to this roster, and the Flames are playing well. The Flames might not. Maybe they'll just keep
Markstrom
everyone.
injured now. That's
Markstrom
concerning.
injured. Even if you just added Chris Tanev to this team, like, they're better defensively. He gives them a lot of what they need. He can kill penalties, play against other teams' top lines. But, like, is that enough? I don't think so.
No, it's not enough to drive you into, like, championship contender, top 5 team in the league conversation. I said it yesterday. I'll reiterate it today. I don't believe they're one move away from unlocking something special.
I think you're right.
I don't think it's whether that's a coach, whether that's a top 4 defenseman, any position you want to choose. I don't think they acquire someone or hire someone and immediately overnight you say, okay, now that's what we're talking about, right? Which is extreme in sports. It doesn't happen often. It happened with Berube in St. Louis, but people forget Binnington played a big role in that too. It wasn't just Craig Berube who came on. Binnington showed up. It was a coach and a goalie.
And they had a good team.
They had a good team. Well, and I think the most classic recent example was in L.A. where they got rid of Murray and they brought in Daryl Sutter, and boom, it was like that team's winning a cup. And they didn't just win a cup. They marched to a Stanley Cup. Like, they dismantled Vancouver and won the President's Trophy that year, I think, in 5. I think they swept the second round, swept the third round, lost in the cup, or won the cup final in 6, maybe 5.
And weren't they elite defensively?
They were, but they were also the 8th seed in the West. Like, they barely got in, but it was like they
weren't they down 3-0 in the first round, or am I thinking?
No, that's not that year. That was a different year where they did that. They came back against San Jose.
Yeah.
That was 2 years later, I think, when they went back to the cup final and ended up winning that.
Okay.
But that first year, they were the 8th seed. They backdoored in, and they completely dismantled everyone. They won 2-1 every night. It felt that way.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was Sutter just saying, this is how we're going to play. We have the makings of it. And the management clearly knew they did. Quick was a good enough goalie, great goalie. They had the makings of a cup contending team. The Leafs are not there. You put Daryl Sutter in his prime, Joel Quenneville, Scotty Bowman behind the bench. That doesn't change the fact that Simone Benoit is like your second or third most reliable defenseman right now.
Yes.
And Timothy Liljegren is a good regular season defenseman. I don't think he can be a top 4 playoff defenseman.
They don't think so either because they didn't play him in most of the last 2 playoffs.
I'm not sure he plays, period. In fact, on a cup contending team,
I
don't think he does. For this team, he would. But, yeah, I mean, that's just the reality. But that doesn't mean that they're never as bad as they are when they're playing their worst. They're never as good as they are when they're playing their best. You know, they're on pace for 100 points in a playoff spot. We'll see what happens. You know, but it does feel closer to like the Matthews, Marner, Nylander rookie season than it did a couple of years ago.
Comparison, yeah.
You know, where remember they were straddling the line. They got in the final weekend, and you were like, they're good, but they're not like a big boy yet.
But you're right to highlight the importance of this trip. Like, if you have a rough trip, you might be out of the playoffs, like a playoff spot by the end of the trip.
Yes.
Halfway through the trip. Like, they're not that. And granted, they played less games than Detroit and Tampa, but they're not that far out from being in not so good territory.
No, that's where they are. They're there with Detroit and Tampa and Pittsburgh and the Islanders. Like that's the group that they're in. So,
Well, and now you're staring up at another first-round series against a tough team if you make the playoffs, period. Which
is going to happen
They're going to
anyway.
make the playoffs.
I think they're going to make the playoffs. I can't say definitively 100%.
Yeah.
Like 2 years ago, it was like they are 100% making the playoffs. This time, 2 years ago, they were so far gone, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And it was like understood by this point they're playing Tampa. Even this time last year, it was like
I looked at it last year. I forgot like how elite they were at the midway point last year. It made sense. And then obviously they bolstered their roster and got even better.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think that's like if they can execute the kind of trades that they made last year, not two of them. Like remember how many they brought in so many players.
they turned over like 6 players.
But if you can make a kind of trade like they made for O'Reilly, where you also get Noel Chari, they trade for Jake McKay, but they also get Sam Lafferty. If they can trade for a defenseman and also get a forward in that trade, and maybe that costs you your first-round pick, that makes more sense. And obviously it's going to cost you other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an interesting question for their front office is like, do we want to do that? Like, let's say hypothetically you could get Tanev and you could get Lindholm, but it's going to cost you a ton.
Yeah.
Should you do it? I don't know. Like,
yeah,
that's going to cost you a lot of stuff.
On the manager
do
to
you
figure
think
that
that
out.
you can win the cup if you did something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder, like, is there a Brad Treliving to Kyle Dubas equivalent of, like, Mark Shapiro to Alex Anthopoulos? Like,
It's similar.
what is – I got to – we went all in for years, and
You're
now
right.
I got nothing in the system.
Yeah.
And that's the job, though. That's what Brad gets paid to do. That's what Brendan Shanahan – that's why they're here, is to figure that out. And they've got to manage the roster, and they got to put their best foot forward. We were talking about defensemen earlier this afternoon, and you posed a great question, like who's more important to the success of Colorado? Is it Nathan McKinnon or Cale Makar? And I think I'd say Makar. It's difficult when you consider McKinnon's got 70 points.
I know.
Or he's not their captain, Landeskog is.
I just kept hearing all weekend, like, it's got to be McKinnon now for Hart. And I'm thinking, like, wait a second. Why isn't it Makar?
Yeah, who had some injuries, too, and, like, hasn't played a full slate of games. He's played a lot of games.
Yeah.
But you have the list. Like, Bobby Orr won the Hart Trophy 3 times.
1970, 1971, 1972. Since then, one defenseman has won the award. Chris Pronger in 2000.
That's wild.
One. That's crazy. And so I have a vote, and I'm going to...
You're going to get it going on Makar?
Well, I voted. I gave him a third-place vote, I think, 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So, like, it's something like I've thought of, and I just think it's kind of insane. Like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this?
I guess my understanding is and I don't have a vote, is the answer always is, well, they have the Norris. So that's their award, which is silly. I mean,
it's like starting pitcher in baseball. Like, we give him the Cy Young. Like,
so you're not getting the MVP? Yeah, exactly. Although it has happened before. I think, did Verlander win the MVP and the Cy Young?
Yeah, I feel
like he did in Detroit. I think it has happened over... Same kind of thing. It's got to be extreme. Like, it's got to be a historically great season.
And I looked it up, by the way. Nick Lidstrom, 4th was the highest he finished.
4th for the Hart.
Yeah.
And again, you look at those Detroit teams. How could he not, like, as great as Yzerman was, Shanahan was, Datsuk, Zetterberg, Lidstrom was the guy. Like,
he won 7 Norrises.
Yeah, 7 and
never
4th.
Finished higher than 4th.
That speaks to how tough it is. Because, like, 2 months ago, we were talking about Quinn Hughes.
Why isn't he? He should be in the conversation.
Hughes has been great.
Why isn't Pettersson?
Elias Pettersson?
Yeah.
Well, I think he should be. For me, he's in my top 3.
I know, but why ahead of Hughes? Why?
Yeah.
I just think maybe we need to start rethinking this.
I don't have an answer for you. I guess it's just history. Like, we're prisoners to history that defensemen don't get in on this.
Yeah. Well,
you're going to change it.
I'm changing it.
You're changing it. Today's Best Bets powered by FanDuel. Make your picks and assemble a same-game parlay in seconds on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Leafs Oilers tonight. Leafs on the puck line, +1.5. Matthews, 4+ shots. McDavid, 4+ shots. That parlay paying +360. Today's Best Bets are powered by FanDuel. FanDuel's goal in the first 10 minutes is the most electric bet in hockey and can be included in any same-game parlay on any NHL game. Please play responsibly, 19+. physically located in Ontario. JD coming up. James Duthie to tee up the game. We'll get to that next. All right, Leafs Oilers tonight on TSN. Also right here on TSN Radio. James Duthie in studio. Big panel night tonight.
Sorry I'm late.
No problem, man.
Thank you for having me.
You have priorities. You had big things going on.
We were waiting on a McDavid interview. I don't know if you said it, but
I didn't mention that, but
yeah,
we were in here. We
were taping a McDavid interview, so he was just a little late to the rink, or we scheduled him too early, and so I'm sorry if I screwed up your.
It's all good.
Program.
It's all good, man. We got Packers Niners this weekend. How
Very
we feeling?
exciting. I haven't started the trash talk yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm nervous about your boy Jordan Love. Like
he's good.
And there's something to be said for like both him and CJ Stroud.
That's what
like,
we were saying.
Oh, I'm sorry if you guys have had this conversation. I missed it. But
So
it's the old like not knowing, how big when you've never been on the stage before, really kind of not knowing how big it is and having no
pressure,
fear, zero pressure. Those two guys it wouldn't shock me if they both won.
James, I think you're doing a good thing for like a fan psychology.
That's what I do.
Start talking this in. Yeah, it could happen.
Well, but I am the most negative
guard
fan.
against it.
Like I am the one, and I watched every down the Niners played all season long, and they were mostly great. But when they go bad, like when Brock goes bad, he goes really bad,
Yes.
and the
It's like
D
one
sometimes.
game.
Yeah, but even the D sometimes gets a little.
That
iffy,
Baltimore
so-
game, they got crushed.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Like that-
I'm not going to be cocky all week. I'll let Hayes
Do the
that.
opposite.
Hey, listen, it's house money for me, man. The Packers, they're the youngest team in the league.
There's
Rodgers
no
is
such
gone.
thing as that, though. Once you get there,
I know. I want to see them win.
Get there.
I want to see them win. I desperately want to
Be
see
like
them
the
win.
dream.
Yeah, to beat Cowboys, Niners, there's nothing better in the NFC for Green Bay. I mean, that's as good as it gets. That's better than beating the Bears, the Vikings, the Lions, because of the history with those teams.
I really think, this whole thing about Green Bay taking the ball first.
Yeah, that's
scoring.
a smart strategy.
I honestly think, like, Shanahan always defers. And I think if they win the toss in the weekend, they need to take the ball. Because I think the Niners will move it against that defense, even though Dallas didn't.
They will.
And I think the Niners doing that and scoring first is critical, just the same way it was for Green Bay against Dallas.
I remember I was in the stadium. I was there in 2020. It was January 2020, NFC Championship game, Niners-Packers. Packers ended up, I don't know if they won the toss or what, but they got the first possession. They were kind of marching. They moved the chains a couple of times. It was like 4th and short on the 50, and LaFleur punted. And I remember I was sitting there with my brother-in-law. I said, they're in big trouble. And Garoppolo went right down the field, punched in 6, and I'm like, you have to be aggressive. Like, you have to. Like that, I'll never, it was so vivid. I'm like, you can't punt. You got to go for it. You have to. Shanahan's going to dummy you.
Isn't it funny how much that's
And they
changed?
did.
Now teams like just go
Now
for
they
it
do.
all the time.
Exactly. Like, they're like, we have to. And especially if you're the underdog.
My very first NFL game was the Niners-Packers NFC Championship back in, I guess, 98. Brett Favre against Steve Young.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I had a sideline pass. I was a local reporter in Vancouver. So I got my cameraman there. My cameraman didn't even have any batteries in his camera. We weren't shooting everything, but I just lied my way into a sideline pass.
Yeah.
So Favre, the Niners lose. I go into the dressing room. Jerry Rice didn't play that game because it was the year he messed up his knee. And I'm like, Jerry Rice is my idol. I got to interview Jerry Rice. We don't have any tape in the camera. And I'm like, Jerry, what did you think? And he's like, F off, man. Go talk to somebody else. And I almost started crying.
You're kidding me.
It was like the saddest,
Jerry, come on,
saddest
man.
moment of my life.
Yeah.
And then I went over, Brent Jones was there. And there was nobody, everybody was at Steve Young's locker. So I'm like, Brent, what happened? He goes, wow, it's tough. And, this is it for me. I guess I'm going to call it quits. So and he's like announcing his retirement.
Yeah,
And there's nobody there, and I don't even have any tape in my camera.
It's like, who are you again? Who do you work for?
Like, Brett, you may want to do this again.
Yeah, exactly.
What a
Are you with
joke.
ESPN?
What a
No, I'm
joke
with
I was.
CTV in Vancouver.
Yeah, VTV.
VTV. McDavid Matthews. Does it still?
Yeah, I think
Does it land for you? Still?
does.
It should, right?
I think I don't remember. Do you have any memories of good McDavid Matthews games? I don't think any. They both have the points. I think 16 meetings. McDavid has 25. Matthews has 16. They've both been good, but there hasn't been any of the old Crosby, Ovechkin kind of showdowns. But it doesn't matter to me. It's still the best goal scorer in the league against the best player in the league and probably the best player ever. So I'm going to sell that marquee every single time, whether it's lived up to it or not, ever before.
I think we need like the international thing to kind of, or maybe some playoffs, like something to kind of build some juice into it.
Yeah, we need a World Cup and
That's not going to
goofy.
That's the four-team World Cup.
An Olympics, an Olympic gold medal
Olympic
game.
games
Would be incredible.
Yeah, that's what you need. ideally,
Good
in
chance
North
that
America.
happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Chance
mean,
that
I
happens.
assume they're going to be there in 2026.
Yeah.
And yeah, at this point, you would assume Canada versus USA. pretty
Russia's
safe
probably
bet.
not. Oh, maybe. Wait a second. The
Who
Olympics
knows?
has been letting the Russian athletes play under
Yeah.
flag, even though they've
Yeah.
been banned from international. But the IOC,
But this one's
double
different.
IHF would have to
Yeah,
sign off on.
and
that.
I don't know. There hasn't been a games, I don't believe, since the war broke out. Like the Ukraine stuff.
No, but I think
That's
they're
different.
competing. I think they're competing.
Is there going to be there in
summer.
24 in Paris?
I believe so.
Okay, I don't
The
know.
IOC's
I don't know.
been notoriously
Yeah.
soft. Like they catch them cheating and doping, and they still let them in. They just don't
Right.
play their anthem. So
Well, we'll see. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a fun game tonight.
yeah, it's going to be good. Stay up a little later,
Oh, we'll be
later
up.
pregame, 8:30 pregame, and
Beautiful.
then
And a chat with McDavid tonight.
chat with McDavid, chat with Matthews in the pregame. We got it all going.
You guys are hitting everything, all the notes. I love it. All right, JD, we'll catch you on the
Thanks
panel.
for having me. Sorry I was late.
Anytime, buddy. There's James Duthie. Jonas, thank you for this as always.
Thanks, Hayes.
You want to stick around for the? You've never been a part of the
Yeah,
throw.
it's
do you?
great.
Do you? Okay. I'm
Can I
going to
say
put
it?
you on the spot. Do you want? You want to throw to commercial? Or this is it?
This is the end of the show?
Yeah. Do you know how
What do
we do this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We're out of here. Enjoy your evenings. Enjoy the games tonight. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes for helping out. We appreciate it. Everyone for tuning in today. Radio, TV, podcast, web. We appreciate that.
You say we'll see you tomorrow, right?
I screwed up. We're out of here. Enjoy your evenings. Enjoy the games tonight. We're back tomorrow at
4 o'clock. We'll chat then. No, 5.
Good try.
It's over.
I just wanted to say the word "we'll chat then" part.
Okay.
We'll chat then.
We're out of here. We're back tomorrow at
4 p.m.
We'll chat then.